Good morning, everyone. About a century ago, the author Dale Carnegie wrote in his best-selling book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's been at the top of the charts ever since. In it, he lays out 30 points to keep in mind as you try to maneuver social strategies like how to get people to like you, how to win people over to your way of thinking, and how to change people without offending them. One of his principles of getting people to like you is this: make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. Get that. The way to influence other people is to make them feel important, to lift them up. And so influencing people has a lot more to do with the other person than it does with you. But the problem is that power and influence have been attracting humanity since the very beginning, and they've caused a lot of problems. Wars between nations have been fought over power. Companies have collapsed because of power grabbing, and families have separated because of struggle with power. In the eyes of the world, power and influence and greatness come from getting yourself to the top. Sometimes, not always, but very often at the expense of others. So we see the same understanding of worldly power that's present in the minds of Jesus' disciples today. James and John ask him this: "Teacher, let us sit at your right and at your left in your kingdom." We want to be in charge, we want power, we want influence. But the answer they're about to get from Jesus is not what they expected. In the eyes of the world, says Jesus, having influence over others means lording it over them, making your authority over them felt. But that's not how I influence others, Jesus says. The way to really influence is to back off. The way to be a leader is to be a servant, and the way to be first is to be last. Because after all, isn't that what Jesus did? Is to be the last in order to be the first to lead us into eternity. How Jesus influenced all of history, wasn't it by doing that, to become the scum of all, in order to raise us all from scum ourselves? These last few weeks and even into next week, in the second reading, which is the letter to the Hebrews, talks a lot about the priesthood. In the Jewish days, the high priest went into the temple on behalf of all of his people in order to bring before God all of the petitions of the people, all of their needs, and to be that mediator, that bridge between God and humanity. And I've had to think about this quite a bit in my own role as a priest. Because today's reading, it says, we have a high priest, the new one, Jesus. We have a high priest who is able to sympathize with the needs of the people, because he is beset by all their weaknesses except for sin. I myself, as one who has been ordained ideally into the person of Christ, am challenged to live that out throughout my daily life, because I'm beset by the same weaknesses that you all are, including sin. So for that reason, I have to be able to push myself to look at that quote from Dale Carnegie. The way to influence others is to make the other person feel important and to do it sincerely. Very often I fall short of that. So as we look at the gift that God has given through the priesthood, through Jesus, the high priest who always made others feel important, I want to say I apologize if I've never made you feel important. Because that's the way to truly influence other people. What does it mean to influence people? Or maybe to use a word that's better known to our younger generation, what does it mean to be an influencer? So because of social media, we're able to see content from all around the world just by clicking on a button on our phones. So a social media influencer is someone who creates online content and has access to a very large swath of the population. They have sometimes hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. That's why they're called an influencer. Some of them try to persuade you of their opinion. Some of them try to teach on an interesting subject, and some of them just provide plain entertainment. They're called influencers because they influence millions of people. Sometimes for good, sometimes for not so good. I want to share with you today an example of a different influencer. Today after Masses, we're hosting the Blessed Carlo Acutis Traveling Eucharistic Miracles exhibit here in our cafeteria and gymnasium here at St. Joseph. Everyone's invited to come and visit. It shares the story of Carlo Acutis, who was a teenager born in Italy a year after I was born. He's already about to be declared a saint. As a teenager, he developed leukemia and died at the age of 15. He would be 33 years old today. Carlo created a website and online database dedicated to all the Eucharistic miracles from around the world. You can still see his online website today with all the graphics, just how he left them back in 2006 when he died. Because of Carlo's programming skills, he's often called God's influencer. Because before YouTube, before Facebook and TikTok and Instagram, Carlo was influencing others to pursue a life of greatness centered on God. His mother said that when Carlo received his first communion when he was 7 years old, he wrote this: "To be united with God, this is my life's program." At 7 years old, he said that. Most Catholic adults can't even articulate that. Pope Francis has praised Carlo Acutis as a role model for today's young people who are often tempted by the traps of self-absorption, isolation, and empty pleasure. I certainly experienced that as a teenager. Little did I know that as a 14-year-old who got my brand new Xbox and was playing it all the time, thinking only about myself and not striving for virtue, on the other side of the world, there was another 14-year-old boy also playing his Xbox. But unlike me, he had his whole mind and heart set on God and serving others. Unlike the apostles in today's gospel, he knew that true power lies in lifting others up, not pushing them down. Carlo would use his savings and would have parish fundraisers to buy sleeping bags and shoes for the homeless and would bring them hot drinks in the evening time. And so his funeral was packed with people that nobody knew because they were all the homeless that Carlo had ministered to in his life. Carlo didn't fall for the trap of self-absorption or isolation or empty pleasure. He was God's influencer because he was first influenced by God, and then he let his life become directed outward to influence others. And as a result, next year he will be the first millennial saint of the Catholic Church. Who are your influencers? And whom do you influence? Have you been influenced by Jesus and have learned his way of teaching, his way of leading, his way of serving? Or are you and I influenced according to the ways of the world? To take the principle of Dale Carnegie again, to get others to like you, to truly influence them, make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. Carlo influenced others because he made them feel important. And he made it his life's plan at 7 years old to be close to Jesus. Let's make that our life's plan. Let's be close to Jesus. Let's lift others up, because that's where true power and influence lie. Amen.